quantity is important, but it's really about your own expectations with your audience. Some of my favorite subscriptions, the people that I subscribe to on YouTube especially, publish maybe once a month, once every 6 weeks. I'm totally fine with that.
Our guest today is a content creator, video producer, and a writer. She's amassed over 1 million followers on TikTok, which is crazy to me. 46,000 on Instagram, 20,000 on Twitter, and nearly at 100K subscribers on YouTube. So congrats on that. She's been producing videos for several years and recently made the leap in January, I believe, to go all in on her own content. So welcome in Cleo Abram to the show. I'm excited for this one.
I'm really excited to be here.
Well, let's. I want to start at the origin story. That's the natural starting place here. So we won't go all the way to childhood and all that. We'll skip the details there. But do you remember the first time where you first started thinking, maybe I want to make videos?
Yes, and it actually was after I was already working for Vox. So my career has taken me from being on the sort of TV development side at Vox to being a video producer and making videos and being a producer on some of the streaming shows that I was developing when I was at Vox previously. And then from there, making more shows with Vox. I spent about 5 years there total, and then launching my own show on my own channels, which is what you just mentioned. So for me, it really was an evolution from already working at Vox and loving the types of explainers that we were making and trying very hard to bring those types of explainers to Netflix and to other platforms that Vox is now on. And I was spending more and more time around Vox's own video team. And I was just really blown away by the type of work that they were doing. And I really looked up to them and admired their creativity. And I remember feeling so excited when we sold the first season of Vox's Netflix show, which is called Explained. And then my job was kind of done on that project. My job, I had succeeded. But I didn't want it to be. I really wanted to go make the show. And so that's what I did. I spent about a year taking night classes at the School of Visual Arts and at Columbia Journalism School as well, and tried my best to learn as many of the video production skills as I could learn outside of the job. And then I began to make a few videos for Vox's YouTube channel and finally sort of put myself forward to make episodes of Explained because they offered anyone who was making videos at Vox in the first place to pitch episode ideas for Explained. And so that's the way I sort of put my hat in the ring, was by pitching episodes that ended up getting greenlit by Netflix. And so my first ever full-time job as a producer making videos was on Explained about a year after we had successfully pitched the show to begin with.
That's a pretty crazy first job in video. That's pretty intense, high stakes stuff. Is there anything? I'm guessing that was a very formative, high growth learning period for you, with going to Columbia, doing like the side learning, and then full time at Vox as well. Are there any frameworks or anything that really stuck out that you learned from Vox that you're still using today, whether it's for idea generation or creation?
Oh, tons. I mean, everything I know about video production itself came from Vox. Vox is the only place, not counting the streaming shows and the other partners that Vox works with to make those shows, all of which are incredible. But Vox is the only place I've ever been a video producer. So my lens on the world of video production and what kinds of stories I want to tell and how I tell those stories. I feel immense gratitude to Vox to sort of bringing me up as a producer and teaching me how to make great explainers, which is what Vox does. I think that the next kinds of storytelling that I'm excited to bring in to that explainer experience are more emotional kinds of storytelling, more personal storytelling, some kind of format experiments that I've always wanted to try. But to answer your question, the bulk of what I do, the sort of visual explainer walkthrough, is still very much informed by what I learned at Vox. And I think that Vox really set the standard for what a good video explainer is. And now many people do it well, but Vox is still kind of like the best of the best.
We'll dive into some specifics a little bit later, because I do want to try to dive into systems a little bit, pick your brain on how you do this. But
yeah,
some more formative questions first, getting a little more theoretical before we get actionable. In the beginning, for a lot of creators, there are tons of questions floating around. Needless to say, you're wondering, like, what should I name my show or my channel? What should I actually cover? What's the concept? What's the format? How do I differentiate? There's a lot of stuff. We don't have time to go into all those questions. But one question people might have is, in the beginning, do you think it's more worth having the best ideas, or is it better to have more ideas? Or I guess another way to put it is, like, should I focus on quality, or should I focus on quantity up front?
I think it's not an either or. I mean, I do think that you need to be fairly reliable for your audience and decide what reliability looks like for you and set expectations accordingly. So some people publish twice a week on YouTube. I publish roughly twice a month. And I am not a big believer. I mean, I heard a couple of YouTubers recently describing the pressures that many YouTubers face to post once a week. I believe that those pressures exist and that they feel them for their kinds of content. But I don't really think that if you are launching a new channel, you have to necessarily subscribe to that cadence of publishing if something else works better for you. So I think, like, quantity is important, but it's really about your own expectations with your audience. Some of my favorite subscriptions, the people that I subscribe to on YouTube especially, publish maybe once a month, once every 6 weeks. I'm totally fine with that. And I'll stay subscribed to them forever because their expectations were set really well, and I love what they do. In my view, incorrect theory about publishing also exists on TikTok. There are lots of people that are kind of gurus of growing on TikTok that say that you need to post once a day or more than once a day. I don't buy that at all. There are people that I love on TikTok, like American Baron, for example. He posts incredibly thoughtful skits that must take days to produce. And he does, in fact, post them once every few days, maybe once a week, maybe a little bit longer even, or maybe just when he finishes. I don't know what his process is like. And that, I think, is just as viable a way to gain a large following that you want to publish to as, you know, the lower-fi kind of video production posting 25 times a day that, like, Victoria Paris is famous for. So I think there's an enormous range of options for creators in terms of how you make the decision that you just described. And all of them are great and viable. And it really just depends on what the creator wants and what's sustainable for them. If you get energized by posting the sort of lo-fi, constant touch, really intimate relationship with your audience, that's a wonderful relationship to build with them. If what really gets your creative juices going are publishing the longer lead time, higher production level videos once a month, that's also great. I would say that I'm more toward the latter. I like to finish the video that I am making and then publish it. And so for me, what that looks like on TikTok is 2 or 3 times a week. And what that looks like on YouTube is twice a month.
Do you find that because you're going for higher quality, lower quantity, you're kind of creating this urgency? Do you find that there are higher stakes in your ideas, or like your expectations for your content are higher than they would be if you were committing to posting multiple times per week on YouTube or 20 times a day on TikTok?
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that they're better. It just means that I have to spend a month working on them. So they better be interesting, both to me personally as a creator and to the audience. I think that there's a question not of what's a better idea than another, but what fits the format that you've given it. So for example, if I were a YouTuber who had a very sort of timely, immediate relationship with my audience. And they said every time there's something in the news, they come to my YouTube channel and they know that I'm going to be discussing it. Well, then the best kind of idea for me would be whatever people are talking about right then. And that would be what would earn a place as one of my videos. Given that my cadence is slightly longer, I'm looking for things that are in the zeitgeist, but not gonna go away tomorrow. So things that I think will be relevant for the next 3 months, 6 months, maybe even 12 months or longer. And so I think it's not like what's a better idea, but what's a better idea for the format. Some videos earn 20 minutes because it takes 20 minutes to explain them and walk through them and deal with all of their complexity. Some videos are best when they're 2 minutes long. And that also, by the way, doesn't necessarily correlate to how long they take to produce. A really good 2-minute video could take a month to produce. And a great 20-minute video could be 3 days. But I think the question to a creator is like, what are you fascinated by? What is your audience interested in? And what do they expect from you? And you kind of playing with those levers over and over again is the way to come up with the best content.
Well, let's dive into, maybe we can go back to your recent leap with your own channel and the ideation behind that. What were some of the questions that you were asking yourself, or maybe take us through your thought process for landing on the concept that you did, landing on the cadence and frequency you did, and the quality? Like, what was that whole process like for you? Was it easier than I'm making it, or was it grueling?
No, it wasn't grueling. It was sort of a slow kind of feeling of being inspired. I love the kind of explainers that I was making at Vox, and I could have continued to make explainers kind of within the general bucket of technology and economics. And as I was making those videos, I came to the feeling as a watcher, as a viewer myself, that I was looking for things that would position big ideas, not just as what can go wrong, what is the potential downside of this idea, but also that fully explain the status quo, fully explain why the status quo is not sufficient, and then explain the potential of this idea to improve life for many people. And so for me, when I looked around at my media diet, I felt very overwhelmed by the feeling that every move that I made was somehow making the world worse, or every move that someone else made was making the world worse, and that I didn't see a part of my media diet. And again, it can't be everything. So this is like one additional flavor. But the additional flavor in my diet of here are some examples of really interesting ideas that have the potential to improve a lot of people's lives. And here are the people that are working on those ideas. Here are the challenges that they would have to overcome. And here's the way in which that this could go right if they accomplish what they've set out to do. And I think that for me was just something that I wanted to watch as a person, and became, the more I thought about it, something that I really wanted to make. I wanted to make a show that was designed to help people see ways in which they could participate in making the world better, help people see other people doing that, help people feel like, help people feel what is true, which is, over the last 100 years, and of course longer than that, we have used technology to improve many people's lives. We've doubled our lifespan. We've improved the quality of life for millions and millions of people. And I wanted to just make sure that people had some way to see options for continuing to do that. So to make a long story short, Huge If True is the new show. And what Huge If True does is, in every episode, it explores an idea that has the potential to improve a lot of people's lives and explores what could go right with that idea.
There's a lot on Twitter about the what could go wrong, so I like the positive spin for sure.
Yeah.
Is it safe to say then for you that this was more of an audience first approach to coming up with the concept and everything, rather than topic first?
Yeah, I mean, I was making something that I wanted to watch, first and foremost. And I think, as with a lot of startups, if you're making something that you want to use, you just have your finger on the pulse of, okay, what should that product look like? What's the pain point that I'm trying to solve? And then it flows perhaps more naturally than it might otherwise if you are maybe even just very well informed about it, but haven't had that personal experience. So for me, I really made a brand of a show that was what I was looking for. And I think that it has attracted an audience quite quickly, much more quickly than I was expecting, that wants that also. So now at the very least, I know that I'm not alone.
And the audience flocking to it just truly talks to the differentiation of the show and how high quality everything is. So congratulations there.
Thank you.
Moral of the story is know your audience really well, make something that you would really care about as well, and make it really, really good. And then the frequency will kind of figure itself out. You can figure out the publishing cadence and all that. But
totally.
I'm curious on the first idea that you had for whether it's for what ended up being the first video or if it didn't even make a cut. Do you remember what the first ideas were for Huge If True? And how did you decide what made it to the next cut of this should be made or should not be made?
Yeah, so I think the question of idea generation is different by medium is the first question. So if you are making a podcast, the set of ideas that are great for you are pretty different than if you're writing an essay or if you're making a video. The question for video, because it's incredibly high cost, whether that's just time of an individual or literally high cost in terms of animations or archive or whatever you're using, the subscription to Adobe Premiere, all of those things are barriers to make the content in the first place. And so the idea has to deserve to be a video. And I don't mean that it has to be a better idea. I mean that it has to be visual. And if you can explain to a friend on the phone the whole thesis of your idea, and they don't have to see anything, then it probably would be a better podcast or an essay. It really shouldn't be a video. There's no reason why that person needs to not only the video needs to be made, it's a sort of high lift thing to do in the first place, but also video demands a lot from the audience. Like, I know that some people put up YouTube videos in the background, but only when they're kind of meant to be podcasts, only when they're like just people talking on screen, and then you can put up a YouTube video in the background and go about your day. But the beauty of podcasts is that you can incorporate them into your day. You can be, maybe someone is listening to us right now and they're walking their dog or they're doing their dishes or something like that. I love listening to podcasts that way. And what's a real privilege in video, but also a drawback in some ways, is that you really demand the total focus of your audience for 3 to 20 minutes. And that's a really big ask if you think about how many other things people have to do and how many other interesting kinds of content there are to watch and read and listen to. So for me, when I'm thinking about video ideas, there are lots and lots and lots of great ideas, great technologies that might be incredible stories. But the question is, why does the audience need to see this one? What is it about this? There's a chart that they need to look at to understand. And not only do they need to see the chart once, they need to have it animate on slowly. And I need to circle the data points so that they understand what was happening at that point in time as the chart plays out. Or maybe there's a graphic that is depicting something about the anatomy, and you're looking at different parts of the body and you're understanding how things fit together in a visual way. Or maybe you're looking at a piece of archive and you're saying, like, here, right here, like, you see, as the statue was toppling, like, this person ran this way, and that shows that they weren't associated with this protest group that was toppling the statue. And then you just play out, like, something about that needs to be seen. And so for me, the way that I cull ideas or allow the the most visual ideas to rise to the surface is I explain the stories to friends. And I sort of walk through the stories myself, and I try and imagine where are the moments where I would have to show someone something. If you're thinking about, like, I'm explaining this topic to someone over coffee and I have to pull out my phone and show them something on my phone, that might be a good video. And if you never have that moment, then it would be a better essay.
Such a strong mental model to go after. It's so simple. I've done something similar for writing as well, where it's more like speak it out loud before you publish it, because then you can figure out if it actually sounds like a human being would ever say that thing, and that usually leads you to better writing. But this is kind of the video version of that, and I've never actually heard that articulated, and I like that. I would already recommend for everybody listening to this to do that, by the way. That's a really healthy way of looking at it. Yeah, when I'm on YouTube and I see a podcast that's literally just two people talking, I'm not ever very compelled to keep watching that. Maybe I'll listen, maybe I won't even. So it's a very common.
Sometimes I'll put them on in the background. I mean, it's not that I won't watch them. It's that they are. I'm using YouTube as a podcasting platform, which is also totally fine. But I'm not engaging with it as a video. And if you want people to engage with it as a video, it's got to earn the visual aspect of that. And, it's funny because I'm also a host. So I also appear on camera, not only in my videos, but I've done that in other shows and work for Vox before. And it's always interesting to think about, like, okay, what's the balance between being a person on camera who's kind of a proxy for the audience and the engagement that you get from that, and like the relationship that you can build with your audience, and also the honest fact that, like, I'm not that interesting on, like, it's anyone. The most engaging person in the world isn't that interesting to look at for 20 minutes, and so I try and figure out when are the moments when I need to be on camera because I'm doing something that is emotional or physical, or maybe I'm just carrying the story along from one place to another and it's a transition. But I try really hard not to just kind of fill slots in my script with me talking unless I have something that I'm also showing.
That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, there's nobody in the world that you just want to, like, look at for 50 minutes and you get everything.
Yeah, it's like Oprah, and that's it. Like, there's no.
Yeah, it's Oprah. Yeah, it's Oprah. That's it. That's the threshold. Well, for you, do you? I know a lot of people use, like, content matrices matrices, I guess is the plural there. That's what you would use to come up with new ideas. So you take a topic and then a format and you mix those together, and that creates your idea. Or some people just do brain dumps in the morning where they force themselves to be bored and then they write everything they can think down and then they go and wait for a while and come back to it. Do you have any kind of model that you use to generate ideas, or do you just allow them to come one by one to you?
Those structures sound really stressful to me. Like, that sounds really hard. The thing that I do to make sure that I have ideas is I work really hard to make sure that there's no time when I have to come up with an idea. Otherwise, I won't have one. So what I do is I have a spreadsheet, and I am always populating that spreadsheet constantly. Even when I'm hard at work on an episode that is going to take me a month to make, I'll be walking around and I'll put like 3 ideas into the spreadsheet every day. Not because I have to, but just because something interesting will happen, and I'll read an article and I'll say, oh, that's a cool chart. And I'll like put the link to the chart in the spreadsheet. And then, I actually have an app on my phone called Captio, which is it's a note-taking app. And the only promise of Captio is that they are the fewest number of clicks to get to a note. So instead of opening my notes app and then clicking a note and creating a new note and then writing it in, I open Captio and it's on a new note immediately. And then I write in whatever it is, and then I press send, and it populates the spreadsheet by itself. It like automatically populates the spreadsheet. And so I can walk around in an incredibly low touch way, just like find ideas in the world. And then when I need an idea, I will kind of go back to that spreadsheet and I'll look through all of those ideas that I had, and I'll say, these 5. And then I'll write up small pitch documents with those ideas where I'm looking at, okay, what is rigorously analyzing, do these have a visual hook that do they have an interesting way to get in the hook? And do they also have a visual meat to them? Is there a chart? Is there an archive? What is the key visual? And I would say 60% of my ideas don't end up having a good key visual, and so they get discarded. But the rest of them, there should always be like some fodder for something in there. And so I guess the answer is that I try and remove that pressure of like sitting in front of a blank page and trying to come up with something, because I don't think I could do that. That sounds way too hard.
Yeah, I mean, so there are a lot of creators that need the constraint, because with creative block, oftentimes the constraint actually helps you kind of get out of that funk. Well, for you though, I'm sure you've experienced creative block. If not, teach me your ways. But how do you personally overcome that when it's happening to you?
Well, I think creative block is kind of an umbrella term for a lot of little blockages. Like there are times when I feel like all of the ideas in my spreadsheet are bad, and all of the new ideas that I've come up with are boring, and I don't know what to make. And that's one kind of block. And in that case, the real privilege of making something out on my own is and this was true at Vox, to be fair, they would give us plenty of time to think up new ideas. I just kind of sit with it for a while, and sit with the ideas that I had, and maybe try and find a visual angle on them, and try and think up something new. And I try and give it a couple days, and generally it comes. There are also creative blocks where like I'll feel that it's just really hard to write the script. And in that case, typically I'm doing something wrong if it's not flowing. And I don't mean that I'm doing like the writing poorly, or that I'm not like sitting there and I'm focusing, but usually the format will be off. Like I'll be trying to write something that is emotional, but really people just want to see the chart, and it should be a 2-minute video, and I'm trying to make it too long. Or maybe the opposite. Maybe I'm writing something that's like so data heavy that I'm missing the point, and I'm getting frustrated because it seems so complicated, when really I could just like remove half of the script and just say like, I feel this way about this topic, and here's why. So I try and give myself room to not, like, I don't have a matrix where I'm like, this is going to be an episode about wind turbines, and it's going to be 20 minutes long, and then it's going to be, made with 3D animation. Like everything comes from the key visual. So like this is an interesting animation of how a wind turbine works. And the best way to show that, because you have to show front and back, means that it's probably going to be a 3-dimensional animation, because that would be beautiful. And then you can show the information the best way possible. And it only really needs to be 3 minutes long, because it's only 3 minutes worth of information. Like that's how it would flow from the topic and the key visual into the format. So I guess I deal with blocks by just trying to figure out what kind of block it is and why it's happening. And if it goes on too long, it's probably because I've gone down the wrong route in the maze, and I need to reverse a little and then figure out a new one.
I think that's a pretty healthy way of looking at everything. Like there are little constraints here and there to kind of give you an idea of where to go next, but ultimately it's figure out what kind of block is this. If you can't figure it out over enough time, I guess we could scrap it. We can move on.
I guess what I'm saying is I try and go around.
Sure. Yeah, no, most people, it's like, oh, I hit creative block. I've got to go for a 3-hour walk to clear my mind. And that can work for a lot of people, but it doesn't work for everybody. So hearing different ways of approaching this stuff is super helpful, because we all go through this.
Yeah, totally.
I am curious to know more. You've talked about Captio, and then it goes into a spreadsheet. So you got an automation there of some kind, and then the rest of your tooling from ideation all the way to finish. After it's in the spreadsheet, do you have other tools after that do you use Notion? Do you use just spreadsheets to organize everything? How do you communicate with other people you're working with?
So I definitely should use Notion, and I'm trying to up-level my organizational structure. But right now I use a spreadsheet for the ideas, a spreadsheet to keep track of the videos and the upcoming videos. I use a sort of flow of Google folders and Google shared folders to keep track of all the documents that we're making, and a flow of shared Dropbox folders to keep track of cuts. I use Slack to talk to editors and animators and anyone else that I'm working with. And I use, I or my editor or animator will use Adobe After Effects and Adobe Premiere to actually make the videos.
Sweet. Yeah. There's definitely a lot to that process. Is there anything you change? I know you mentioned like maybe you want to go to Notion. What would you change to make that easier?
Yeah, I mean, I think Notion just allows you to keep track of everything all together. Like there's a sort of interesting scatterbrain thing happening sometimes where I'm like, did I put that PDF in Google Drive because it's a research document, or did I put it in Dropbox because it's an asset that we're going to put into After Effects and then highlight? And sort of sometimes things like that are just confusing. And if I had a better way of keeping track of everything all together, maybe it would be faster. But it seems to be working. I will say the one thing that I try really hard to do is not overcomplicate things until they need to be. And you run the risk there of like if you're building a city. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and the city is a grid, and it's an incredibly well planned. I mean, there are some sort of special cases where the roads are diagonal or built later or something. But for the most part, D.C. is a very well planned city, as is New York. And there's one element of sort of management and organization where perhaps I should do some city planning. But on the other hand, I think that it's very easy, especially when you're starting something new, to get really caught up in like, what's the best structure for this? And what's the best, like, I can think of this when we were making a brand for Huge If True. Like we chose some colors, we chose some fonts, and we chose a logo, and that's it. And there are all kinds of other things that you could do, and sort of example animations and, templates for this and that. But instead we decided to start with the bare minimum and then build up slowly. And I just think, especially if you want to be scrappy and you want to get stuff done as quickly as possible. And most importantly, you want to iterate. You want to figure out what works and what doesn't, and not have a bunch of stuff that you thought deeply about and put a lot of time into, but don't end up using. I just kind of try and add stuff and only change things when they need to be changed. Kind of a, if it's broke, don't fix it mentality about making a show.
I can relate to this. I lived in France for a while, and the roads, like that's the common creators organization system is like, there are no numbers. It's all just random names. They're all different. And you have no idea where anything is, and it's all diagonal and skewampus and all that. And then you get to DC, and it's like, oh, cool. Salt Lake is the same. I live in Salt Lake, and that's pretty much the same thing. All in a grid, way easy to navigate. Everything is just like 100 yards by 100 yards, super easy. That's where we all need to be. You had mentioned when you're going back to the first tool you use, Captio. So you draw inspiration from things that you come across, put it in there. Maybe you could expand on what those channels of inspiration commonly are. Do you find yourself getting a lot of ideas from Twitter, or is it more just stuff in real life that sparks your creativity? What are the channels where you find are providing the highest ROI of ideas getting into Captio?
Twitter is only really good for finding as a discovery mechanism for other longer form things. I will very often see journalists I admire or leaders of companies sharing things that they have written, and then I'll go on a deeper dive into that and end up finding like some chart that's really interesting or some report that they're linking to that is, it makes for good fodder for a video. There's one case I can think of a video coming out soon where I was inspired by the like a Twitter debate, because a lot of people seem to be very curious about one topic. And so I was like, oh, that's a pretty visual topic inherently. Like maybe I'll double click on that one. But mostly it's reading longer form things. And I'll find those things either on the New York Times or Vox or wherever else I end up reading longer journalistic articles, or I read a lot of climate reports these days looking for interesting technologies that they're talking about or interesting promises that are being made. And then I investigate like, okay, how are we thinking about maintaining that promise and like who's working on actually doing that? An example of finding an idea as sort of a mix of all of these things is a former colleague of mine and friend, David Roberts, writes an incredible newsletter, and he shared a topic about he shared I subscribe to a lot of newsletters. That's another way that I get ideas. And in my inbox one morning was a newsletter on enhanced geothermal, which was a topic that I had read about from him at Vox. And so I looked into that, and then I read a climate report that talked about enhanced geothermal. And then I began to do my own research and kind of fell down this rabbit hole. And I realized that this was a really interesting topic. Enhanced geothermal is a way of describing the use of new technologies in geothermal that helps us get a lot more energy out of the ground. And one of the reasons why it's kind of interesting and controversial is that a lot of those technologies found they were discovered or invented because of the need for them in extracting oil and natural gas. So it's this really interesting story where it's kind of a carbon redemption story for these technologies, where they were invented to release a lot of carbon into the atmosphere, and now they're being used by people who would like to find cleaner sources of energy. So I was like, oh, that's an interesting kind of emotional arc. Like I'll go down that rabbit hole. And that became the first ever episode of Huge If True. And I interviewed David for it and another person who was working on the same technologies when they were being applied in fracking for oil and natural gas, and then has since launched his own enhanced geothermal startup using the same technologies. So basically, I'll find the idea, I'll find the visual, and then I'll really go down the rabbit hole and do a bunch of interviews with experts on that topic, and start to come up with animations for that show or for that episode, and just kind of unravel the thread as far as it will go. And usually that becomes an episode. Let's see what else. Another example is, there was an episode that I did that got a lot of attention on Twitter about new ways of thinking about clean energy, sort of more optimistic ways of thinking about basically, I've been told my whole life, most of us have, that we need to conserve energy, and we do. And if we figure out ways to meaningfully get significantly more clean energy, we could live in a world where more people could use more energy, which less so for Americans, but for many people around the world is a crucial and urgent way to reduce human suffering. And so I presented kind of the stick of clean energy, where we need it to prevent catastrophic climate change, and also the carrot of clean energy, which is like, hey, we could, as a global population, we could use more energy if we cleaned up our energy sources. And that episode was inspired by another newsletter from another former Vox colleague named Matt Iglesias, who published a kind of think piece on the same topic. And then I interviewed Matt for the episode and made an episode kind of about this insight that he had given me. And it was about like my journey to rejigger the ways that I had thought about energy use. So that's where I get a lot of the ideas. I just kind of go about my normal news diet and then extract them. The other way to think about this is like, if you're going about your normal life, you can kind of be in curiosity mode or not. So if you're taking a car ride through New York City, you can be looking out the window and you can be thinking to yourself like, all of the fire escapes are built in the same way. Like, I wonder if there was one guy or girl who designed those fire escapes, and they look that way because in, I don't know, the 1980s, there was a controversy about fires and fire safety. And then everyone built these fire escapes to all look a certain way. And then they got codified in law. And now that's the way that they're built. I don't know. I'm making that up. I have no idea if that's true, but you can kind of play out the things around you and be curious about how they work and like turn it turn it on. I can never really turn it off, let's be honest, but I can like ratchet it up and down.
Same, yeah.
So.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that's coming across is like with a lot of these ideas, I sense some level of passion and sophistication. By the way, your news diet is far more sophisticated than mine ever will be. But right now, all of my media consumption is like kids shows with my kids. So I have a very unsophisticated news diet. But I am curious if an idea comes into your mind that you had mentioned one of the pre-qualifiers, like, is it a good visual? Can I see the visual? Can I imagine that? Is it going to lend itself to video? If it kind of passes the eye test, but you're not really crazy about the concept, or maybe you're like neutral to it, is that still something you'll work on, or do you prefer to only let ideas you're passionate about come through and get made?
It's an interesting question, because if it is visual, if it has a really good key visual, I probably will end up being passionate about it. Like, there's never been a situation where the video has been really good, or the opportunity for a video has been really good, and I've been like, oh no, I'm not really interested in that topic. Like, I care about a wide range of topics. Tech and economics is sort of everything. Has a tech or economic story underneath it in some way, and so I've never happened upon an idea that I think is really great that I'm not also personally interested in. There are ideas where I am personally interested, but I can't find the video angle, the like key visual. That's one kind of video that I won't make. And that just, we'll have to sit there on the spreadsheet until I find the perfect chart in like a year or two, and then maybe it'll become a video. Another example of videos that I can't really make are like topics that are very important, but I am not the right person to speak on. There are lots of topics like that I'm personally very interested in, but like I have made, for example, after the invasion of Ukraine, I was making an episode on low Earth orbit satellite internet. And I spent some amount of time in that video clarifying why it would be helpful to have non-cabled, non-fiber internet in many parts of the world, including places in the world where war is interrupting internet connectivity and making sure that people can get access to information. And I specifically used Ukraine as an example and talked about Starlink and the announcement that was made about Starlink in Ukraine, for example. But I am not going to be necessarily the right person to walk through the decades-long geopolitical tension between groups of people in parts of the world that I have not studied prior to hearing about them in the news like everyone else. I try and keep a really close eye on the news. I try and be as informed as possible, but I have an area where I am experienced and understand and can therefore explain those topics to other people. And I try and make sure that I'm not trying to explain everything to everyone all the time. And I respect other people's expertise in those areas and try and learn from them. So it's basically the three categories. It's like, if it's a really good visual, and would make for a really good video, I'm probably kind of inherently interested in it because I love making good videos. If it's something that doesn't have a good visual, I might be kind of heartbroken to leave it in the spreadsheet, but I might do that. And then even if there are good visuals, but I don't feel well equipped to explain that topic, I'll let that one go as well. And I will wait until I have a way to explain something that I think I can actually add.
It's always tempting to try to make every idea work, because ideas can be hard to come by. But the great creators always do try to go with the ones that really matter, the ones that they can knock out of the park.
Yeah.
If I were to ask you, or I guess if I were to tell you there's a person out there that goes onto your YouTube channel specifically, and they're kind of looking to swipe not like steal from you, but look at how you do things and learn your process and all that good stuff. They're kind of looking at the back end of the videos and trying to learn from you. What would you hope are some of the key things that people actually learn from what you do? Not necessarily what you say in the videos, but what you do.
Well, it's interesting. It's changed a little bit since I left Vox, because when I was at Vox, the hope was that, and this remains a hope, but the hope was that I could explain something complicated in a simple, comprehensible, engaging way, and that they would come away having learned something or having sort of contextualized information that they could then read, so that the next headline that they would read, they would understand the context behind it, and that they would be better prepared to have their own opinions and participate in the conversation. And I think that's what explainers can do incredibly well, is like, oh, there's a level of, by having really good visuals and by spending the time to produce things in a really high production way, you can distill things down for people in a way that's not condescending and that's not actually superficial, but it is short. And so you can help people participate in more conversations or have more sort of context than they might have otherwise, because you're doing that amount of like boiling down for them. You're like making maple syrup. And that's still definitely a goal. One of the additional goals that I have now, and things that I hope people would take away from my content, is I am actively looking for ways to help people see how they can participate in improving life for other people. So all of the topics that I work on, I think people, if they analyze my videos, and hopefully as I continue to put out more, they'll see that I'm doing a lot of work to find topics that I think are genuinely interesting and deserve more attention, so that, you know, for somebody who is like graduating from engineering school and wants to find an area to go work in, like maybe they'll have lots of options if they watch lots of my videos. You know, there's an attention to optimistic, hopeful topics that might re-engage people with the opportunity to help others. And then I think if they were watching lots of my videos, they might also see a kind of renewed effort to, I think they would see an effort to put myself into the explainers, to do things that are more personal perhaps than I might have made before. So like, for example, I made a video about anti-aging research, and I approached it at the beginning very much like I would have if I were making a Vox video. I said, I'm going to interview the head of the most important trial of this new anti-aging research area, and he's going to explain to me how this works, and he's going to explain the context of how aging works and how physicians think about aging, and how what he's doing is going to reveal some new information that might be helpful to us. And I'm going to have a bunch of charts, and I'm going to have a timeline, and like, this is going to be an explainer. But then in that same video, there's kind of a whole minute in the middle where I talk about why I care about this, why I want to live longer in the first place. And I'm using home videos of me and my niece and me and my grandmother, and my grandmother is talking about my grandfather who passed away and I miss him. And like, there's a whole full minute of like purely emotional storytelling where I'm just sharing why I care. And I think that's also a lesson in how I make videos now, and how I'm trying to do better in making videos, is like, why care is a really important question when you're taking up 7 minutes of people's time. And one of the many ways to explain why care, in addition to explaining the stakes for other people and just engaging people in the most interesting story possible. And like, there are lots of ways in which you don't have to introduce personal emotion in order to make people care. But for me, one of the skills that I'm trying to continue to invest in is like just being a human being on my YouTube channel, and like showing people why I care, and then maybe they'll care more as well.
My last question here, I always end with a very vague one, because I like to see what you come up with. End of all this, we've been talking for almost an hour now. What are your final thoughts? Is there anything that we didn't cover that you wish we had?
I actually asked this question at the end of my interviews as well, and I love this question. And now I'm realizing that it's pretty hard to answer because you think back on everything you've talked about and you're like, what did I say? I have no idea. I hope it was helpful. I think that if a lot of people listening to this are creative in their own way, and maybe they have creative projects and maybe they are independent creators, which is great, or they have side projects that they love, which is equally great, and they are thinking about a lot of your questions were about how to structure that work and how to be inspired in that work and how to maintain that work and make it sustainable. I think one of the things that I try and do is remember why I am doing what I'm doing. So for example, I was making a daily show for Vox in the middle of the beginning of the pandemic. So for most of 2020, and it was really hard. I was like recording constantly and I loved this show. And also it was incredibly draining. And I had this little sticky note that I put on the bottom of my computer. So like no one else would see it, but I would see it. And it had just a couple things on it. It was like, have fun, improve as a host, like, have a distraction in COVID, be helpful to other people who are feeling overwhelmed. It's like 4 things. I forget, there might be other things, or maybe those things aren't quite right, but it was like 4 very simple goals. And sometimes I would feel frustrated if the show wasn't getting watched as much as I'd like, or I didn't feel like an episode was perfect, or I just felt really tired. And I would look at that sticky note and I would just be like, oh, yeah, I feel like I'm being helpful to other people. Like, yeah, I feel like I'm a better host now than I was 2 weeks ago. Like, great. I'm like doing what I set out to do. Nowhere on this little sticky note is like have the largest audience or like, it just helped level set for me what my actual goals are. Having a large audience is not an end goal in and of itself. Like that's not good enough. And I think many people, because the external numbers are so visible on most of these social media platforms, like you end up being like, oh, my goal is 1 million followers. Like, no, it's not. Your goal is to make a great show that earns 1 million followers, maybe. And if it doesn't, like continue to iterate, but that's not the end goal. And so I think making sure that you've set up those expectations for yourself about why you're doing what you're doing is underratedly important and can help sustain you during times when like other goals might not be going as well.
I totally agree. Anytime I've set an audience goal and actually hit it, most of the time I don't even hit the audience goal. When I've actually done that and hit it, it's always disappointing compared to what I thought it was going to be like. But totally. when you're able to just help somebody, even in a small way, there's no beating that. That's the ultimate as a creator, or really in any career. Like if you can just be helpful to other people, service is where you're going to find the most joy. And the way you serve people as a content creator is usually through information. And I think everything you've brought forth here is basically gearing toward that one principle, like set everything up so you can make stuff that is helpful to people. And if you know exactly who those people are, then that's great. Just be helpful to people. Well, I want to give you a chance here at the end to talk about Huge If True and anything else. Also, if you just have any like cool jokes or anything cool going on in your life, this is your platform here to promote yourself and chat about your day-to-day right now. Thank you. My day-to-day is almost entirely Huge If True. Like it's an enormous time commitment to try and launch your own thing, but it's been so much more than I even hoped it would be in the first year. So the show is on YouTube and on TikTok. You search for my name and you'll find it, Cleo Abram. It is longer form, more in-depth, like highly produced videos on YouTube. And then on TikTok, I'm just sort of constantly making and testing out ideas. So you can see me like playing with
an idea where I've just sort of drawn a chart and I'm explaining that chart in a TikTok, and then the TikTok will do well. And I'll be like, oh, maybe that's something that we didn't talk about. That's kind of a way that I test out ideas, and I iterate on how to approach an idea by asking people on TikTok, and then I maybe take that idea to YouTube. So both are interesting and different places and are creatively fulfilling in different ways. But yeah, that's what I spend most of my time on. My little toy Australian Shepherd is sitting right here. He's someone who occupies a lot of my other time.
What's his name?
His name is Thor.
Thor.
He needed a big name. But I really appreciate you taking the time, and I hope that this was helpful. I also respond to comments and DMs, and especially on TikTok, I make videos based on people's comments. So a lot of my videos, you'll see they're like responding to a comment because someone has asked a really good question. So we talked about idea generation. Asking the audience for good ideas is always a great 100%. Way to go about it.
Feedback to content is the way to go. And for the audience members, this is your chance to get famous. So let's.
Yeah, I'll answer your question directly.
Cleo, again, thanks so much for coming on. This was massively helpful. And
Thank you.
This is going to be great for a lot of people, myself included. Thanks for spending time with us.
Thanks so much for asking great questions. Talk to you soon.